All right, good morning, everyone. So in our webinar today, we will have a quick introduction on Zero Trust, the pillars, and also we'll see some of the questions that Microsoft is receiving globally. But we will also cover other topics, what also our partner Ascent is hearing from the deliveries that they are doing with their customers. What are some of the common ways to get started? We know Zero Trust is really a hot topic for many organizations today, and it may not be always easy to find some quick wins. So we're going to talk about that. And also, we just want to cover some of the, common pitfalls and what to focus on and how to make sure that your zero trust journey will go, I would say, smoothly. There will always be some challenges, but we are going to cover those as well. So if you go to the next slide, for example, yeah. So zero trust is really not a new topic. So while preparing for this presentation, I wanted to share some key dates with you. And in fact, starting from 2004, we saw the premise of zero trust with the Jericho Forum. And when they started talking about the deperimeterization, so this word is very hard to pronounce, but basically they start saying that having everything behind the corporate firewall and assuming that this is safe is no longer something that can help in reducing the cyber threats that will be more and more sophisticated. And starting in 2004, we start seeing two streams. One focusing on the identity, and this is the path that Microsoft followed, and the other one most on the network side. And if you remember, 10 years, 15 years ago, cybersecurity was really heavily about networking. I myself, I was a networking guy, installing Cisco PIX firewalls, for example. It was all about VLAN segmentation, proxies, reverse proxies. So there were some strong headwinds to really keep cybersecurity onto the network side. So in 2010, for example, we really started with Forrester seeing the zero trust term. And continuing in the network side, we saw Google Beyond Corp and some of the books about the zero trust. I also wanted to highlight the fact that starting from 2014, Microsoft also starting to advocate about the assumed breach. And this was basically because we were involved in many cyber attacks and recovery. And starting from 2014 already, we start seeing that sometimes attackers were inside the organization for a very long period of time and no mechanism to identify them. So we published a document on that, and we will share the links after this presentation. And then in 2016, the conditional access was released in Azure Active Directory, and we were really moving to that direction with the passwordless initiative. Also, I wanted to share with you our story very quickly about the password. Which we believe have no place if you want to continue in your zero trust journey. Internally at Microsoft, we were able to almost get rid of password. I personally don't know mine, and I will bet that most of my colleagues in Microsoft, it is the same. Because when we open our session every day, it's with Windows Hello, and almost all of our applications are in single sign-on. So from the security standpoint, this is good, but also from the user standpoint. So you no longer have to remember 7 or 8 characters of passwords, sometimes with capital P and a dollar sign. I'm thinking about password 123, for example. So password is really a very big problem, not only for security teams, but also for end users because they need to remember them. They need to change their password quite frequently, but still remember the password. So we start seeing some repeating pattern, password 123 with dollar sign, for example. And these passwords are very easy to guess for the attacker. And if you click next, then we start seeing also the convergence between those two streams. So if you click next, please. Yes, and today we are really seeing the convergence between those two streams coming from the identity side and from the networking side. So there is an increasing consensus and convergence between those two, but still there are some variation. And one of my manager used to say, if you ask 8% about what zero trust is, you'll probably get 10 answers. So it's not everybody is aligned with the definition. So we'll really try over this webinar to give you what we believe is zero trust and what are the key components. So if you click next, the zero trust is really around those three key principles, and I'm sure you've seen this already. It's all about verify explicitly the connection, so no assumption that everything that is protected beyond your corporate firewall is safe. So every connection needs to be validated and authorized. And also we need to take into account the context around the connection. So meaning that if for some reason someone is connecting to one of your servers and the context has changed, meaning that the connection is no longer trusted, you need to take action and challenge the user for MFA, for example, or at least modify the level of permission that they will have in the application, for example. And then the least privilege is also one of the key pillars. Not everybody needs to be administrator, and not all administrator needs to have a domain admin or global admin. You'll be surprised to know that during our different intervention with customers, sometimes we just find, if you take the example of Azure AD, for example, in some smallest organizations, some of them have almost 20 global admin users. So this is really it's something that is dangerous because if they lose their password, you will be in trouble. So being able to first, it's identify which are the required level of permission, just enough for your administrator to do their job. And Microsoft has acquired also recently a solution that is called CloudNox that can also help organizations that are using multi-cloud infrastructure, using Azure, AWS, and GCP, for example, to identify what are the level of permissions that the administrator have on these different cloud service providers. And there is this interesting concept that we will, with this solution, analyze for 90 days to see what are really the permission that you are using. So if over a period of 90 days you didn't use some of the permissions, so it's probably you don't need that on your day-to-day job. So making in place some procedures where, of course, if you need to do some elevated task, you will ask for elevated permission for a short period of time that can be validated internally with the organization. And of course, the last but not the least, the assume breach. Now attackers can be in an organization for a very long period of time and nobody will identify them. So it's also very important to just change the mentality and the state of mind. Not everything that is protected behind between your two-layer firewalls sometimes is safe, but just assuming that you may already have an intruder inside the organization. So you need to put in place measures that will help you to identify them. So if you click next, our zero trust definition is also closely aligned with the NSA Zero Trust guidance. So, of course, you can always access to these different documents. So it's all about never trust and always verify, like we said, and the least privilege, the assume breach, and the explicitly, verify explicitly before accessing all the resources. So if you click next, the way that we really see the zero trust. Next, please. Yes. So no, you went. You Yes, perfect. Thank you so much. So, securing your organization with zero trust is around those three key principles, but we will rely on signals. And the signals should come from identities. For example, if you have a user that is, connecting in the United States, and a few minutes later, the same user is connecting from Japan, for example, there is no way to travel. At least I'm not aware of that. Japan to US in few minutes. So if this is the case, then you may probably want to challenge this user on MFA or give him some restricted access. So of course, in some cases, it's because the VPN IP address is different. So we need to find a way to resolve this false positive. But still, if it's no the impossible travel scenarios, or if the IP address is a Tor exit node, so then you really need to take that into consideration. There is another example which is key, is really the endpoint. So the endpoint needs to be secure, and we'll talk about all the security solutions that you can implement, but we need to take that as a signal, and if for some reason there is a malware on these devices, on the device, so then we'll block access to some of the critical resources. But as soon as the malware is cleaned up and the device is okay, so then the user can also get back to his day-to-day job. So it's all about taking the signals from identities, endpoints, really getting this information in the security policy enforcement, and taking the decision whether we'll allow or not access to applications or infrastructure and such. So it is also key, and I will finish on these two notes, to get visibility, which is very important, either on the endpoint, on the identity, and there are several solutions that can help you using some analytics and some automation to automatically allow or block or modify the level of permission that the user has. So if you click next again, please. So then, yeah, how do I know where I am in my zero trust journey? So there are several assessments which may not be the right path for every organization, because there is always some assessment for something. But at least at Microsoft, we do believe that it's important to identify where we are in this zero trust journey, and also what are the actions that you can take. So I was giving the example of single sign-on, which really for us in Microsoft, it makes our life easier, because you really don't have to type any password, and which is really cool. So probably starting with the single sign-on, and seeing what are the MFA that you can have. Also looking if you have some visibility around your devices, around your cloud. You already may know which are the solutions that can help, and Jason will give us more details. And moving gradually, and looking at other stages, to see, for example, if you have some real-time analytics, and if we, correlate some of the informations. Okay, and then the optimal, of course, is to be able to, automatically and dynamically enforce some security policies having a look at the environment, if it's protected using, some advanced threat protection solutions, and also, analyzing the productivity and security signal to drive better user experience, because it's all about the user. You don't want your user to feel like the security teams just, want to block them for doing their day-to-day job. We should be in this journey together. So I don't know, Jason, if you want to add any other points to what I just said.
Yeah, I'd love to jump in. Thanks, Samba. This is really one of the areas where someone like Ascent as a services partner can really come alongside our customers in order to be able to help realize where they're at in some of these places in these journeys. So before you go on to your next slide, I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about how the maturity model, Microsoft's maturity model, or CISA's maturity model, they have a really good one. The NIST 800-207 has some really good information on zero trust. There's lots of information out there. But one of the things we're hearing from our customer base is that putting together and sequencing all of the areas of zero trust is a big challenge. And I think that the order matters. The order in which you go about some of these items really matter. And they really end up being a challenge if you try to address them out of order. And that order isn't the same for every single company. That order is slightly different for just about every company, depending on where you're at in some of the pieces of maturity. So one of the big things that we're hearing from our customers about something like this in the maturity model is that they're actively seeking assistance as they go throughout the ordering. And I think that that's a pretty important piece to keep in mind. It's just because there's a good maturity model out there, or there's a handful of good maturity models out there, that making sure that you're doing it in the right order is a pretty important step. Another thing that we're hearing that I think is pretty critical is a lot of feedback from security persons, from CIOs, who are saying, we know we've been doing the right things for a long time. And I think that's a very interesting piece of feedback, especially from a consulting organization, a security consulting organization, is customers saying, we know we're doing some of the right things. So help us understand where those right things exist within our zero trust, our zero trust journey. I think one of the fact of the matter is zero trust isn't going to be solved by a bunch of technologies. That just like people, process, and technology, and here at Ascent we like to say people before process, before technology, I think is a good way to go about it. But just because you have the right technologies doesn't make you more zero trust. You can configure the right technologies in a very non-zero trust, architecture. That's why we say zero trust architecture. So putting them together in all the right in all the right ways is pretty important, and organizations are probably doing a lot of the same things. Having moving off of ADFS is a great project to be able to do. Organizations have had that in their route for a long time. Moving on to Intune is a great route, probably the right thing to do. Organizations have been doing that for the right time. Lifting and shifting from data centers into Azure is the right thing to do for most applications. So putting those in the journey in the right way is something that I think is pretty critical to a zero trust journey. Curious if you have heard some of the same things, Samba, from your customers.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really love the, ADFS part, because, many customers are relying on the server, and sometimes it can be a single point of failure for some of the authentication. So, it's really defined, but I like the fact that also all the organizations have their own pace, so they don't all have to go all in at the same time. But really just identifying, as I was saying, some of the quick wins that they can have and start this journey. So you also talk about the Intune and the modern management. So there is always the core management that is also possible if these organizations have a CCM server, for example, and they just want to test to see how it will work. So over the last couple of years, I would say over the last 2 years, with the pandemic starting, and all of us starting working from home, we were called by most of our customers. Some of them were heavily relying on the VPN. Saying that for all the users, when you're working remotely, all the traffic needs to go through the VPN. And so because the VPN appliance were not designed to take that load, and I'm sure we all had the same experiences. So at some point, they, of course, decided, so what do we do? We can increase the bandwidth, but it's not scalable enough. We can, have more VPN servers, but still it's not scalable enough. So one of the ways that they did to solve this problem is just, okay, so why do you need to have all the network traffic going through the VPN? So maybe it's a good idea to explore the split tunneling. Do you really need to have your Office 365 and VPN traffic going through your VPN? So it's all about this type of questions. But the pandemic really was a wake-up call for everybody, and we really pushed forward, to the split tunneling. And even us, also internally in Microsoft, we also had some of the challenges because we were still relying too much on the VPN, and it was a journey. And I believe it was a few months ago where our VPN is no longer up by default. So there are still some critical servers. I believe it's one or two, and one of them being the holidays system, which is very old. So you still need to access the VPN for that. But still. We no longer use the VPN, so it's not on by default. So these are also, some of the things that your partners and our customers can use in their journey.
Yeah, somebody, I think that's great. I think the VPN conversation and the architecture changes that happened in COVID really drove a lot of these conversations for people, or at least accelerated them. They probably were on the roadmap in the beginning as SaaS applications continue to grow. Probably were already on the roadmap, but definitely accelerated them. One of the things that I like to articulate with Zero Trust is that a proper Zero Trust architecture enables you to work the way that you wanted to work in the beginning. It really enables, a lot of organizations have any data, anytime, any device strategies, and a Zero Trust architecture enables that a whole lot simpler. You grew up in networking, I grew up in networking, so it enables that a whole lot simpler than a lot of other security architectures. And I really think it's conscientious of the user. The architectures are conscientious of the user. So you had mentioned the VPN changes. I think that's a great way to get started. And so one of the ways in which we really encourage our customers to think about Zero Trust, and I'm curious if you think about some of the same, is to address them in the pillars. And we certainly don't want to silo the pillars. I think we'll talk a little bit about that later, because they're all very, very connected. But thinking about them and discussing them in the context of the pillars. So the ones that I think organizations can grab some quick wins are looking at the identity pillar, looking at the endpoint pillar, and then looking at the data pillar. The data pillar requires a significant amount of process and probably some behavioral change. But the identity pillar and the endpoint pillar, there's loads of capabilities within there that I think organizations can grab and get closer to a Zero Trust architecture there in those pillars. We had talked about moving off of ADFS onto all of the things that Azure Active Directory enables. There's other things like ensuring that you have proper privilege access management, ensuring that you have proper identity governance. Those are great projects that would align to the identity pillar. And in the endpoint pillar, you had mentioned endpoint management. But considering all the ensuring you have a modern EDR on your machines, that you have the visibility, that's properly coordinated with your security operations center. Those are other great, I would call them low-hanging fruit, great get-started projects that are relatively simple for an organization, probably already on the roadmap, and probably easy to enable, and with the Microsoft stack, probably already within the licenses that they've purchased. So I'm curious if you also put together some of the same roadmaps, maybe in the pillars or with the same kind of context for your customers.
Yeah, so I do agree with you. You don't have to swallow the elephant, in one time. So it's really a journey, and the identity piece is a very big one. And I will also, talk about the MFA. So at Microsoft, we, for a very long period of time, always say to our customers, MFA is key. If your user will always get some phishing attacks, and if you have your critical servers that are protected, and if you have MFA, it will reduce, considerably the attack surface. But still, we even added, I don't know if you've seen this, but the security default on Azure AD that can, just enable MFA for everybody, and some more granular approach using the conditional access. But I really do believe that identity is also the first, should be the first step, and it's not necessarily very difficult also to just enable MFA. I know some of the servers or some of the applications may not support MFA, but there are always some solutions that you can implement. So this is what we're seeing, and also like the fact that sometimes customers already have licenses that cover EDR, for example, a Microsoft solution. So if they have some E5 licenses or E5 security, or so in our conversation, sometimes just say, well, you already have the licenses, and we know that sometimes migrating an AV from one vendor to another can be really challenging. But you could always only enable the EDR piece and then continue your migration at your own pace. But at least you will get this level of visibility. So yeah, start with the identity, look at the MFA, start also exploring the single sign-on, and see what are all the configuration options that are available in Azure AD, but also in other Microsoft security solutions that you may already own.
Yeah, I think that's great. And as we move to the next slide, we've talked a little bit about some of the good ways to get started. I think another thing that we can really help all of the attendees think about is some ways in which organizations have stalled in their zero trust journey. So some of the ones that we've seen that I think are pretty critical and good lessons learned is organizations focusing on all of the exceptions rather than all of the commonalities. And I can give a couple examples of them. One is exceptions in servers. So where do servers live? What pillar do servers live? I get that question every now and then. And I think that's a great question. It probably could be in lots of different spaces. Servers have things, the data exists in one pillar. The actual compute probably exists in another pillar. The networking to it exists in another pillar. And the operating system probably exists in another pillar. So it's probably in lots of spaces. But I like to approach leaving servers all the way into the application. And generally, I address applications. I encourage customers to address applications last. Because along the way, you've probably found different architectures that change what you would have done with that server anyway. And in some circumstances, the challenges that existed in, let's say that you tried to identify servers in your endpoint pillar, the challenges that you would have identified at that point in time will legacy out by the time you get to your application pillar. So I think it's a good thing to think about when you go through your zero trust journey is don't let the hiccups, or don't let the small things, or don't let the exceptions prevent you from making marked progress along the things that you know that you need to do. Regardless of where you put servers in your zero trust journey, you need to migrate all of your endpoints into Intune, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, we have a very interesting question. I'd like to get your thought on that. So, what are the typical bottleneck in advancing in maturity? So, are there more technological or cultural or lack of skills? And how do in your experience, how do you recommend to overcome those?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge in a zero trust journey, and I think this actually addresses another question that was put earlier in the chat. The
Mm,
biggest challenge in the zero trust journey is that organizations have a hard time figuring out how they're going to measure success. And I think that there's a lot of ways in order to be able to do it, and there's a lot of different ways in order to be able to communicate progress. But there's a unique challenge in zero trust, and it's that zero is in the name.
yeah.
And organizations have a hard time thinking about, well, we're trying to get to zero, literally a race to zero. And it's for those of us, have been in security technology for a long time, you're probably never going to get to zero.
Mm,
Along the maturity model, most organizations are going to have something that's intermediate for a few years. And
yeah.
that's probably the right decision for their organization. So if we can't get to zero, what are we fighting for?
Mhm.
Finding those things that are really good success measures, I think, are the hardest things for organizations to be able to do. And they should do it early on in their zero trust journey. They should align on those success metrics early on in the zero trust journey. I think there's some that are pretty good. You could measure, systems in Intune. That's a good measure. You could
Mhm.
measure removing legacy authentication from your environment. That's a good measure. There's a
Yeah.
handful of them all the way across the pillars. In the data pillar, you can measure number of or percent of documents that have been labeled. That's a good measure.
Mhm.
And those are all good ways to be able to measure success. But I think the best one, the ultimate one, is to tie every single one of these architectural decisions and all of your success metrics back to a risk discipline.
Yeah.
Something that we're really passionate at Ascent about is getting organizations to think about risk the way that we thought about risk probably 10, 15 years ago. It seems to be something that security technologists have abandoned as a discipline, but risk is an art and a
Yeah.
science. And tying threat times vulnerability times consequence equals risk is an important part that we need to resurrect while we go about our zero trust journey. Otherwise, there's not a whole lot of ways for us to align on the architectural decisions if we don't have a strong risk function that's tied into the security organizations. So one of the early things that we do in a zero trust journey with our customers is talk about the risk register.
Yeah.
Let's
Absolutely.
see what's on your risk register. Let's see how you're maintaining that. And depending on how well an organization is maintaining that or how mature their ability is to determine their level of risk, that's going to be some of the earliest things that we do in a journey because it ends up driving proper success metrics. It ends up making sure that we're aligned top to bottom within the organization and allows us to make really strong architectural decisions along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. I do agree. And actually, I also wanted to add to that, zero trust is not something that you just buy. Okay, so you don't buy zero trust. So this is just some of the misconception that sometimes we heard. And okay, how do I? Yeah, I have the budget now. How do I become zero trust? So it is not such thing. It's really like the way you articulate it. It's more of a journey, and you need to start somewhere. And there are some very quick win that you can use and that you can start. So I will also add that as for any security project, it's also very important to get the senior leadership on board. Because if there is only into the IT environment that the CIO or the CISO says that okay, well, we want to try and start our zero trust journey, it's always better to have support also from the leadership team, especially for biggest organizations. So this is also something that we've seen that can really help.
Yeah, agreed. Another one of the bottlenecks, as I continue to think about it, is I've seen it, and this is probably more common in larger organizations. Um,
Hmm.
Organizations letting the separate IT business units address the pillars individually.
Yes.
So, the endpoint team is going to go over there and work on all the endpoint stuff, and the identity team is going to go over there and they're going to put together their roadmap and work on the identity things. In smaller organizations, that's less likely to
Yeah.
happen, but in large organizations, I think that's very, very common. And although I personally would want to address the pillars of zero trust separately because I think they're easy to talk about, we definitely don't want to address them completely independently because they have so many ties all the way across the board. I used the example of apps in the beginning, but another really common one is data. Everybody's going to have an opinion about how to address the data.
Yeah.
Every section along the pillars is going to have some thoughts and about how they address the data challenge, and the data challenge is mostly a process problem.
Yeah,
Uh,
so this is really why it's really challenging because um, you need to find the right balance, about, okay, we'll try to do these steps in silos, I would say, but at the same time, we need to, communicate and have cross, project communication. So this part is really challenging, I would say. All right,
So,
so
Samba and Jason, we have about 10 minutes left, and I've given the capability for all of our attendees to come off mute. I want to give them
okay.
the opportunity to do that. If anyone would like to come off mute and ask any questions, now is your opportunity. Otherwise, we can keep going for 5 more minutes or so.
Okay.
And those were great questions and great dialogue. I'm learning right along.
That's great.
Yes. All right. Well, if there's no attendee questions, let's keep going and maybe wrap in about 5 minutes.
Yeah, and also let's see what are the questions that Microsoft we get often. So we have a slide about that, and I think it will also resonate with something that our audience will have. So if you can just share the slides again, the previous one. Yes. So many customers, ask us, okay, so we understand the zero trust strategy. We also understand that it's important to get signals and manage end devices, whether they are laptop or mobile devices. But how do you guys at Microsoft do you really require everybody to enroll all personal devices because there are also some challenges related to that, and especially in Europe, where users really do not want to enroll their personal devices. So it's probably the same in other part of the world. So the corporate decision at Microsoft is that yes. If you want to access corporate data from your personal device, yes, we need to enroll your personal device. But if you don't want, that's fine. If, for example, it's you just need to access your Outlook, then you can access to Outlook in the web. And we are also, providing other type of solutions, Windows 365, for example, or remote desktop, and this type of solutions can help if you can have your workstation somewhere into the cloud, and so your personal device will just be a way to remotely connect to your working desktop, for example. So the other one, also the other question that we receive is that yes, as Microsoft, you may have many IoT type of solutions, and so how do you really approach zero trust into that context? And Microsoft has acquired a company, I think it was 2 years ago, it's called CyberX, which is really the leader in the IoT protection space. So we heavily rely on their technology to identify all the connections, because on the zero trust, it's always assume breach, explicitly verifies, but you need to get also visibility around your environment. So we're using this solution to get this level of visibility, and also verify that some of the PLC devices or some of the IoT equipment are not communicating, with the internet or with the, other part of our environment. So yeah, just I don't know if you also receive some of the questions that if they are similar, or if you can give us your thought on that as well.
Yeah, I think we get a lot of questions about enrolling, and I think that it kind of applies to what I mentioned before. Every organization has a little bit different. I actually like to address the mobile use case in the data pillar, and I think it's helping a little bit with the conversation, because as you just mentioned there, most of the concern around mobile devices relates to access of data. So for organizations who are really trying to figure those pieces out, I wait for the mobile conversation in the data pillar, because that allows you to make a lot of progress in the endpoint pillar, not having this edge use case, no pun intended, use case around mobile devices slow down the objective. Because I think that the majority of those things, really, you can architect any data solution within Intune. Basically, every use case that anybody has come up with, Intune provides a capability either in the device management or in the application protection capability. And then when you layer on the information protection, when you layer on classification on top of it, you really have a multi-layered defense that's built in there. But I think turning it from what's going on my device to how do I access the data on my device makes the conversation just a little bit easier on that first one. Yes. And then in the IoT space, I think CyberX addresses a lot of the concerns. I like to think of IoT, I usually tell people that have IoT questions, don't make it more complicated than it needs to be. IoT is very similar to some of the exact same things we do in every other compute on every other network. And I think that along that same strategy, Microsoft provides a lot of capabilities with the CyberX acquisition, but then also, basic cloud protections and visibility, because it's really a visibility challenge with Sentinel that we can continue to think about on how to protect. So those are the approaches that we take on the mobility and IoT point of view.
Yeah, I like that. And there are also some of the challenges, users are concerned if their mobile device is enrolled. And so then the corporates can get access to their personal data, and, they don't want to do that. And really, this is something that we can understand. So this is where really having, other approach. So, you don't have to enroll your personal devices, but at least your organization can provide an alternate way, using your desktop into the cloud or something like that. So also, is Microsoft moving away from VPN? So I touched on that a little bit earlier on. So we are really not heavily using VPN anymore. We had a VPN provider. So previously, and as any other company, Microsoft is always getting new technologies, our own, but we also have to rely on firewalls and other technology vendors. So over the last couple of years, we get rid of the security vendors, and we are using Microsoft native VPN capabilities, remote access servers, but we are really not using it, broadly. So just for specific servers that still today needs to access VPN access, but otherwise it's all onto the internet. If you would move to the last slide, because I think that we have only a few minutes left. So our learning, and this is really some share learning between us at Microsoft, but also Ascent and Jason. It's really, if you want to start your journey, you cannot do that without the people. You cannot also do that without the process. So the technology piece is probably the easier one. But all your users needs also to have this culture of security. We are all collectively responsible to securing our organization. So we all need to make sure we are not clicking, on any links, and we are not doing any harm to our organization. So the people part is very important. So once you get them on board and you have the right process, usually the technology piece will follow. So I like to get your thought on that also, Jason.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Like I said before, I like to say people before process, before technology. I think it's the right way to answer some of these problems. I think with the cybersecurity skills gap challenges that are becoming more and more apparent, the right people is a compounded problem, because it's not only the people in your organization, it's the people who are putting together these technologies. So the people problem is definitely one of the utmost concern. And the technology doesn't do you any good if you don't have the right process around it. So couldn't agree more.
Yeah, okay, awesome. So, Paulette, I think that we are at the end.
Yeah, we are at time. Thank you so much. I know that Zero Trust security is top of mind for most organizations. So that was a great discussion, Jason and Samba. Thank you so much. And thank you, everyone, for attending. We'll send the recordings out in the next week or so. And good luck with your journey with Zero Trust. Thank you,
Thank you
everybody.
all for attending. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much. Goodbye.